From your perspective, what was the 70s like? We have to look at movements, politics, culture.
Look, for me, I guess the 70s were simultaneously a continuation of the late 60s, which for me was a real period of activism, but also because I had started making photographs seriously, it was a moment that I began to channel those ideas that I had about the larger social world through the camera. So it was an interesting moment for me because I was coming out of a very activist history, but now I had the camera. And I became interested in using the camera to talk about the things that I was interested in. And I think also, doing that in Harlem at that time, which was the moment that the Studio Museum in Harlem was creating a community for black artists in New York. So what became part of my conversation with both the Harlem community and with the community of artists that I was beginning to meet. I met Frank Stewart at the Studio Museum in Harlem. I met Carrie Marine at the Studio Museum in Harlem. I met Drew Allen at the Studio Museum in Harlem. I met Corinne Simpson. I began to meet other black people that were talking about their experiences and our shared experiences through the camera. And that's when I began to realize that you could make pictures that were both at the top of their form as an art object, but that could be used to talk about substantial issues as well. And I began to form a community that supported that. So that all really happened for me in the 70s, because prior to that I was mostly involved in making music. It was the point at which I stopped being a drummer professionally, transitioned from the music into the visual art form.
What area of music are we talking about? What type of music? And who were the people that you were related to at that
mostly
time?
jazz. I was a student of Milford Graves. I was a student of Freddie Waite, Roy Brooks, Tootie Heath. People who were practicing in that field at the top of the form. I had some very, very serious teachers who taught me a great deal of respect for both the art form of music and drumming, but by extension for any art form. And I took that and began to translate that into my photography. It also began to give me a sense of the importance of institutions, because I met Freddie Waite, Roy Brooks, Tootie Heath at the Jazzmobile in Harlem. And that was in the early 1970s. I was still playing until I would have been like 71, 72, 73, 74. 75, I started making photograph series. So I already had a community of musicians, most if not all of them who were older.
So what were your formal training in the photography world, say?
At that point,
Developing, using different types of equipment, how did you come into all of that?
My formal training began around 1976, 77 at the School of Visual Arts. And probably the teacher that had the most influence on me there in terms of beginning to get my formal training, Sid Kaplan, master printer who printed for Robert Frank, Diane Arbus, among other people. Bill Brecker, who was very close associate of David Bestall. And then Larry Siegel, who started the Midtown Line Photography Gallery. And Larry and I took an almost immediate liking to each other. And at that point, I started hanging out at the Midtown Ron Photography Gallery. And that was another community. But it was another institution. It was another institution around which a community of photographers had formed.
So you started using large format for what reason?
Large format? Well, up until the late 80s, I was doing pretty much what most photographers I knew in New York were doing. 35 millimeter, small camera, black and white street photography. Coming out of the work of Henry Cartier-Bresson, Andre Curtis, and all those photographers who made those kinds of pictures. It basically created the history for that kind of picture making. And at some point I decided I wanted to make different kinds of pictures, probably because I began to study the history more. And I began to realize that there were a whole other set of options. And I think certainly because I was definitely a part of, at that point, what you would call the black photographic community. And the work coming out of a lot of folks in that community was directly indebted to Roy de Carava. And Roy was kind of almost the literal and conceptual heart and center of that community. I think I began to feel like rather than making pictures that honestly responded to certain situations and circumstances, that I was responding by making a certain kind of picture.
What kind of exposure were you receiving back during the 70s? In terms of what you were doing?
I was taking myself to museums and galleries. When I started off, there were very few people that I knew that I could have a conversation with about photography. So my father, who brought the New York Times home every Sunday, I started looking at it. And on the back page, I see these listings in the art section. Down at the bottom of the art listing is this little thing called photography. So I started looking. I said, okay, I think I kind of heard of this guy, Richard Avedon. Marlboro Gallery, 57th Street. Okay, I can figure out how to get to 57th Street. I was living out in Queens in New York. So I basically just started drifting around on my own, looking at a lot of photographs, and that really began my education. I started going to galleries, going to museums. Somehow or another, I ended up down here at 4th Street. But I just basically went wherever I thought the thing was that I needed to see.
Mm-hmm.
There was no one else to have a conversation with about it. My brother wasn't interested. There was nobody on the block that I was friends with that was interested. So I would just go. And my folks said, fine.
So you're getting ready to publish another book now?
2 books. One book is my Harlem, USA work, which was the first group of pictures, the first group of coherent pictures that I made in the 70s. And the Art Institute of Chicago.
So you say coherent, what do you mean by that?
Beginning to think about pictures as an extended statement rather than individual photograph. To realize that the pictures did have to hold their own individually, but they were also adding up to a more coherent and extended statement, and that the pictures had a relationship to each other, and that each picture consciously built on the idea that was the larger project.
And the other book?
Yeah, well, that one, the Harlem, USA book, is coming out in May through the Art Institute and Yale University Press. And then the Renaissance Society in Chicago is doing a book of a selection of my photographs from 1981 to the present.
So within that body of work, how much is involved with the Polaroid system that you kind of like evolved into and fully developed?
Well, Polaroid no longer exists as a material.
But you had a chance to work with one of the ultimate Polaroid systems, which was that large format camera.
Yeah, I spent 10 years making pictures with the 20 by 24 Polaroid camera almost exclusively. And I felt that at the end of those 10 years that I had worked through every conceivable idea that I had about how to make pictures with that camera in the studio. Because, I always think that, the work is something that you make in response to questions that you ask yourself. And then in order to answer the questions, you make the work. I spent 10 years working with that, and then...
So through that, you became a notable portrait photographer?
A what?
Notable portrait photographer.
Well, I started making 4x5 portraits in the streets after that, using 4x5 Polaroid film, positive, negative film. And then after that, started working in color, using color film, but also using color Polaroid 100 film to set those pictures up. Quite frankly, it's been pretty difficult for me to think and work as a photographer the way I have for the last 35 years now that there's no longer any Polaroid material. Because working with the 4x5 camera certainly is about a certain kind of precise setting up of things in front of the camera. And the only way you can know that is to see a Polaroid to know if it is precise. So it's been a little bit of a mini crisis, actually. Now, Fuji makes an instant film. The Fuji instant is not, to my mind anyway, as good a material as the Polaroid. And as it turns out, the Fuji back doesn't fit the particular 4x5 camera that I have. The back is thicker. It's about an 1/8 of an inch too thick to fit the back of my camera. So what do I do in order to continue working this instant material? Buy a new camera to fit the back?
So I understand.
Or just stop making videos. Like
I understand you're getting ready to take on another career now.
I've always had multiple careers. I've always been a writer. I've always been engaged in any number of social issues. I think probably what's happening now is that having made photographs continuously for 35 years, I think now I can use my time differently in terms of what I choose to.
So you're getting ready to be awarded?
Yeah, I'm getting ready next Monday to get the Lucy Award, which is given to photographers for lifetime achievement in the area that they work in. I'm getting a Lucy Award for my work in the photographic portrait. And I'm happy to say that the award is going to be presented by none other than Vince Aletti, who used to be, I first knew Vince's work when he was writing about music. Vince was a music critic who ended up becoming an editor and then photography critic at the Village Voice.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
So I'd like to thank you, Mr. Bey, for the interview. And that award will be given what day?
Monday, October 25th, the 24th. Yeah, October 24th.
Lincoln Center?
Lincoln Center.
Okay, thank you.